I didn't expect anything meaningful to happen on that bus. It was one of those late afternoon rides that feel longer than they actually are. The kind where the windows are slightly fogged, the air is too warm, and everyone looks like they're just trying to get through the day without thinking too much. I was sitting near the back, headphones in but not playing anything, just watching the city blur past. Same route, same stops, same tired routine. That's when he sat next to me. Not because the bus was full, it wasn't. There were at least 5 empty seats he could have taken. But he chose the one beside me like it was already decided. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. I glanced up, pulling one earbud out. "No, go ahead." He smiled, easy, natural, and dropped into the seat like we'd done this before. "I always feel weird asking that when it's obviously empty," he said. I let out a quiet laugh. "Yeah, but it's polite." "Or unnecessary," he added. I shrugged. "Depends on the person, I guess." That could have been it. Just a short exchange between strangers. But he didn't put headphones in, didn't pull out his phone. He just leaned back slightly and looked out the window like he was thinking about something. Then, a few seconds later, he turned back to me. "You take this route often?" There it was, that moment where you decide whether to keep things surface level or let the conversation breathe. "Yeah," I said. "Almost every day." "Same," he replied. "I think I've seen you before." I frowned slightly. "Have you?" He nodded. "You always sit around this area. Either by the window or right here." That caught me off guard. "Okay, that's a little observant," I said. He laughed. "I swear I'm not creepy. I just notice patterns." "Or people," I said. "Maybe both." There was something about the way he said it. Not intense, not awkward. Just honest enough to make me curious instead of uncomfortable. "I'm Richard," I said after a moment. "Joseph," he replied. We shook hands briefly, simple and normal, but it felt like crossing some invisible line, from strangers to something slightly more real. "So," Joseph said, leaning back again. "What do you do?" Richard, who always sits here. I rolled my eyes a little. "Office job. Nothing exciting." "You?" "Architecture student," he said, which sounds cooler than it actually is. "Yeah," I was going to say, "that sounds kind of impressive." "It's mostly deadlines and regret," he replied. I laughed again, this time a little more naturally. The conversation flowed after that. Not forced. Not one of those awkward back and forths where you're searching for things to say. It just moved. We talked about the city, about how certain streets feel different at night, about how public transport somehow makes you feel both invisible and exposed at the same time. At one point, he said something that stuck with me. "I like buses," Joseph admitted. "You get these random pockets of life. People who would never meet anywhere else just end up next to each other." I glanced at him. "And you talk to all of them?" He smirked. "No, just the ones that seem worth it." I felt that land somewhere deeper than it should have. "Wow," I said. "That's a lot of pressure." "Relax," he replied. "You're doing fine so far." I shook my head, smiling despite myself. The bus slowed at the next stop, people shifting, doors opening with that familiar mechanical sigh. Neither of us moved. "So," he said casually, "where are you getting off?" "3 more stops," I answered. "You?" He paused for a second, then said, "Same." I didn't question it. Not then. We kept talking, drifting into lighter topics. Music, terrible movies. The kind of stuff you say when you don't want the conversation to end, but don't want to acknowledge that either. And then, just like that, my stop came. The bus slowed again, the doors opening. I stood up, adjusting my bag. "This is me." Joseph stood too. "Yeah," he said. That's when I realized he hadn't been planning to get off here before. "You live around here?" I asked. He hesitated just enough for me to notice. "Not exactly," he admitted, "but I don't mind the walk." There it was. Clear as day. I stepped off the bus, and he followed. For a second, we just stood there on the sidewalk, the bus pulling away behind us like it was taking something with it. "Well," I said, "that was unexpected." "Yeah," he replied. It was. A small silence settled between us. Not awkward, just new. "So," he added, hands in his pockets, "do you always talk to strangers on buses?" "Only the ones who analyze my seating habits," I said. He smiled. "Good," he replied. "I'd hate to think this wasn't special." And that was the moment I felt it. Not something dramatic. Not some instant, overwhelming connection. Just a quiet shift. Like something had started without either of us fully realizing it yet. "Do you want to walk a bit?" he asked. I should have said no. I had things to do. A routine to get back to. A normal day waiting for me just a few steps away. But instead, I said, yeah, sure. And just like that, a random conversation on a bus turned into something I couldn't walk away from. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of everything. We didn't have a plan. That was the first thing I noticed as we started walking. No, let's go here. No clear direction, just two people moving side by side like the conversation itself was enough to guide us. For a while, we kept things light. Joseph pointed out buildings like he couldn't help himself, casually explaining why one looked wrong or why another actually worked. I didn't understand half of it, but I liked listening to him talk. You see that one? He said, nodding toward a glass office building. Looks modern, right? But it's lazy design. Lazy? I raised an eyebrow. It's a giant glass thing. Exactly, he said. That's the problem. People think glass equals modern, but it's just safe. I glanced at him. You're very opinionated about buildings. I'm very opinionated in general, he replied. Yeah, I'm starting to notice that. He smiled, like that wasn't a bad thing. We walked past a small park, then a row of cafes, neither of us suggesting we stop, even though we easily could have. It felt like if we paused, something might shift, and neither of us wanted that yet. At some point, the conversation dipped into something quieter. So, he said, kicking lightly at a loose pebble on the sidewalk, do you always stick to routines like that? Like what? Same bus, same seat, same time. I shrugged. It's just easier. Or safer, he added. I looked at him. You say that like it's a bad thing. He didn't answer immediately. I don't think it's bad, he said finally. I just think people hide in routines sometimes. That hit a little closer than I expected. And you don't? I asked. He let out a short breath. I try not to. By getting off buses at random stops with strangers? He glanced at me, a small grin pulling at his mouth. Exactly. I shook my head, but I couldn't help smiling. There was something about him that made everything feel slightly off balance, but not in a bad way. Just different. We ended up slowing down near a quiet street lined with older buildings. Less noise. Fewer people. The kind of place where conversations naturally get a little more real. Joseph leaned against a low wall, looking at me like he was deciding something. Can I ask you something? He said. You've been doing that this whole time. Yeah, but this one's less about buses. Okay, I said cautiously. Go ahead. He hesitated, not long, but enough to make it feel intentional. Why did you take your headphones out? He asked. I blinked. What? On the bus, he clarified. You could have just nodded and ignored me. Most people would have. I thought about it for a second. I don't know, I admitted. You seemed normal. He laughed. That's your bar. Pretty much, I said. Also, you didn't feel like someone who'd make the ride awkward. And now, he asked. Now I'm not so sure, I said deadpan. He smiled again, softer this time. I almost didn't sit next to you, he admitted. Really? Yeah. I saw you a few times before, but I figured you probably didn't want to be bothered. I frowned slightly. And today you just decided to ignore that. Today you looked bored, he said. Like you were somewhere else in your head. That surprised me. I was, I said quietly. He nodded, like that confirmed something. Yeah, I could tell. There was a pause after that. Not empty, just heavier. I shifted slightly, leaning back against the wall next to him. So you've been noticing me for a while? I said. A little, he admitted. And you chose today. Yeah. Why? He looked at me then, really looked. Not playful this time. Not casual. Because I thought if I didn't, he said, I'd keep wondering what would have happened if I did. That landed somewhere deep. I didn't know what to say to that. Not right away. So I just nodded. We stood there for a moment, the quiet stretching between us in a way that felt significant. Then I said, you know what's weird? What? If you hadn't sat next to me today, nothing about my day would have changed. Yeah, he said softly. Same. And now? I asked. He let out a small breath, glancing down the street before looking back at me. Now I'm standing here, he said, hoping this doesn't end as just a random conversation on a bus. There it was. Not a confession. Not anything heavy. But enough. I felt it again, that shift. Slightly stronger this time. Yeah, I said. Me too. Another quiet moment. Then Joseph straightened a little, like he was shaking off the weight of that honesty. Okay, he said lighter now. I'm going to ask something slightly less intense. Good, I replied. I was getting worried. He smirked. Do you want to get coffee? I looked at the street around us, then back at him. I should have hesitated. I didn't. Yeah, I said. I do. And just like that, the walk turned into something more. Not just time passing. Not just a coincidence. Something intentional. And the strange part was, I already knew this wasn't going to be a one-time thing. I could feel it, even if I didn't understand it yet. The cafe we ended up in wasn't anything special. Small, slightly crowded. The kind of place where the tables are too close together and the menu is written on a chalkboard like that automatically makes it better. But for some reason, it felt like the right place for that moment. We ordered quickly, coffee for both of us, and found a table near the window. For the first time since we met, there was a shift in the energy. Not awkward, just aware. Like we both realized this wasn't just a random interaction anymore. So, I said, wrapping my hands around the warm cup, you do this often? Follow strangers off buses? Joseph asked. Yeah, that. He shook his head. No, you're a first. Wow, I said. I feel honored. You should, he replied, completely serious. I smiled, but something about the way he said it made my chest tighten slightly. We sat there for a moment, watching people pass by outside. Then he said, "Can I be honest again?" I exhaled softly. You haven't stopped being honest. Yeah, but this one might sound weird. That hasn't stopped you so far. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like he was trying to figure out how to say it. I didn't just notice you on the bus, he said. I noticed that you always looked like you wanted to say something to someone, but didn't. I blinked, caught off guard. That's a very specific observation. I know, he said. I'm good at those. I let out a small laugh, but it didn't quite land. Or maybe you're just projecting, I said. Maybe, he agreed easily. But I don't think I am. There it was again. That way he said things without pushing, but still somehow making them stick. I looked down at my coffee for a second, then back at him. And what does that say about me? I asked. He shrugged slightly. That you're careful. That's not exactly a bad thing. No, he said. But it can be limiting. I held his gaze for a moment. You just met me, I said. I know, he replied. And somehow I still feel like I've known you longer than that. That should have sounded ridiculous. It didn't. Yeah, I admitted quietly. It kind of feels like that. The conversation slowed after that. Not in a bad way, just deeper. Less joking, more real. We talked about work. About how I ended up in a job I didn't really care about, but kept because it was stable. About how he chose architecture because it felt like creating something permanent in a world that changes too fast. At least you're building something, I said. He shook his head slightly. I'm trying to. That's more than most people. Is it? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, most people just stay where they are. He looked at me for a second, then said, like you on that bus? I sighed. You're not letting that go, are you? No, he said simply. I couldn't help smiling again. There was something about the way he challenged things, not aggressively, not like he was trying to prove a point, just naturally, like curiosity was his default. At some point, our coffees were gone, but neither of us moved. You know what's weird? I said after a while. What? If anyone asked me what I did today, I wouldn't even know how to explain this. Joseph leaned forward slightly. Then don't explain it. What do you mean? Not everything has to make sense immediately, he said. Some things just happen. I tilted my head slightly. That sounds like something you tell yourself a lot. He smiled faintly. Maybe. There was a pause. Then he added, quieter, I'm just glad I sat next to you. That's simple. No build-up. No overthinking. And somehow, that made it hit harder. Yeah, I said. Me too. For a second, neither of us looked away. And that's when I felt it again, stronger this time. Not just curiosity anymore. Something pulling. Something real. I cleared my throat slightly, breaking the moment. So, I said, trying to sound casual, what happens now? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for his phone, then hesitated. I could ask for your number, he said. That would be the normal thing. Yeah, I replied. It would. But this doesn't feel very normal, he added. I raised an eyebrow. Is that your way of not asking? He smiled. No, he said. It's my way of asking differently. He slid his phone across the table toward me. Put your number in, he said. And I'll text you something later. Something like what? I asked. You'll see. I looked at him for a second, then at the phone. There was a part of me, the usual part, that would hesitate, overthink it, question it. But that part had been quiet all day. So I took the phone and typed in my number. Handed it back. There, I said. Now you're responsible for whatever happens next. He took the phone, glancing at the screen, then back at me. I already feel like I am, he said. That did something to me. I stood up slowly, grabbing my bag. I should go, I said, before this turns into me completely ignoring my responsibilities. Yeah, he said, standing too. Probably a good idea. We walked out together, back onto the street. The air felt cooler now, the lights softer, like the day had shifted while we weren't paying attention. We stopped near the corner where our paths would split. This is me, I said. Yeah, he replied. A pause. Not uncomfortable. Just full. I'll text you, he added. You better, I said. He smiled slightly. I will. I turned to leave, then hesitated for a second before looking back. He was still standing there, watching me. Not in a strange way. Just present. I didn't say anything else. I just nodded once, then walked away. And the whole time, I could feel it. Something had started, and there was no way it was ending there. I didn't expect his message to come that fast. I was barely 10 minutes into my walk home when my phone buzzed in my hand. I didn't even need to check to know it was him. Still, I did. Joseph, tell me something honest. I stopped walking for a second. No, hey. No, this is Joseph. Just that. I stared at the screen, a small smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. Then I typed. Me. That depends. How honest do you want this to be? The reply came almost immediately. Joseph, the kind you wouldn't usually say out loud. I exhaled slowly, leaning against a nearby wall. That felt very I thought about it for a second longer than necessary. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I knew whatever I chose would set the tone. Then I typed. Me. I didn't want that coffee to end. 3 dots appeared instantly. Disappeared. Came back. Then. Joseph, good. Because I didn't either. Simple. But it hit. I pushed myself off the wall and kept walking, my attention now completely on my phone. Joseph, your turn. Ask me something honest. I didn't hesitate this time. Me. Did you actually plan to get off at my stop? A pause. Longer than before. Then. Joseph, no. Another message followed right after. Joseph, but I decided to the second you said it was yours. I slowed down again. That same feeling settling in my chest. There was something dangerously easy about this. Me. That's either bold or slightly unhinged. Joseph, I'm okay with both. I laughed quietly to myself. People passed by, cars moved, the city kept going, but everything felt a little muted compared to whatever this was. Joseph, tell me something else. I frowned slightly. Me, you're very demanding for someone I met an hour ago. Joseph, and yet you're still answering. I shook my head. He wasn't wrong. I thought for a second, then typed slower this time. Me, okay. Something honest. Pause. Me. I feel like if you hadn't talked to me today, I would have forgotten this day completely. The typing bubble stayed longer this time. Then, Joseph, yeah. Another message. Joseph, me too. I reached my building without even noticing how I got there. Unlocked the door. Stepped inside. Still staring at the screen. Joseph, that's why I said something. I leaned back against the closed door, reading that again. Then again. There was something about the way he said things. No extra words. No trying too hard. Just direct. Me. You always trust your instincts like that? A short pause. Joseph, not always. Then. Joseph, just when it feels important. I swallowed slightly. This was starting to feel like more than just a good conversation. And that thought should have made me slow down. It didn't. Me. And this feels important? This time, the pause stretched. I could almost picture him thinking, weighing the answer. Finally. Joseph, yeah. Just that. No explanation. But it was enough. I pushed myself off the door and walked further into my apartment, dropping my bag somewhere near the chair without looking. Me. You don't even know me. His reply came slower now. Joseph, I know enough to want to. That did it. That was the moment something shifted again, stronger, clearer. I sat down, running a hand through my hair. Me. You're making this very hard to treat like something casual. There was a slight delay. Then. Joseph, good. I let out a quiet breath. Me. That wasn't a complaint. Joseph, I know. Another message followed. Joseph, are you busy tonight? I stared at the screen for a second. This was the part where people usually slowed down. Spaced things out. Played it safe. But nothing about today had been like that. Me, no. Almost immediately. Joseph, come back out. My heart actually skipped. Me now? Joseph, yeah. I stood up without even realizing I'd decided. Me where? A few seconds passed. Then, Joseph, same bus stop. I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. Of course. I grabbed my jacket again. Me, give me 10 minutes. The reply came instantly. Joseph, I'll be there. I didn't overthink it. Didn't question it. I just left. And as I walked back toward that same stop, the one that had felt completely ordinary just hours ago, I realized something. This wasn't just continuing. It was accelerating. And I had no intention of stopping it. He was already there. Of course he was. Leaning against the same bus stop sign like he hadn't moved all day, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the street until they landed on me. And the second they did, he smiled. Not surprised. Not uncertain. Like he knew I'd come. 10 minutes, he said as I approached. Impressive. You didn't think I would? I asked. I hoped you would, he replied. That was becoming his pattern, saying things just directly enough to make my chest tighten a little. I stopped in front of him, slightly out of breath, though I wasn't sure if it was from walking fast or everything else. So, I said, trying to sound casual, what's the plan this time? He shrugged lightly. No plan. Again. Worked pretty well the first time. I shook my head, but I was smiling. Okay, I said. Then what are we doing? He pushed himself off the sign and stepped closer. Not too close, just enough that I felt the shift. Walking, he said. Talking. That's it. For now. There was something about the way he said for now that made it feel like more. We started moving again, back down the same street, but in the opposite direction this time. The city had changed, darker now, lights reflecting in windows, the noise softer but somehow more alive. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Not because we didn't have anything to say, but because it felt different now, more intentional. So this is kind of insane, I said finally. A little, he agreed. You realize we've known each other for, what, a few hours? Yeah. And this is the second time we're meeting today. Also true. I glanced at him. And you're not questioning that at all. He looked back at me, completely calm. Are you, he asked. I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. Because the honest answer was, no, I said. He nodded slightly, like that confirmed something. Then why should I, he replied. We walked a bit further, passing a small convenience store, a couple standing outside talking quietly, a car idling at the curb. Everything felt normal. Except it wasn't. Tell me something, he said. I exhaled. You really like doing that. Yeah, he said. Because you actually answer. I gave him a look. That might change. I doubt it. I shook my head. Fine. What? He was quiet for a second. Then, have you ever done something like this before? I frowned slightly. Like what? Met someone randomly, he said, and just kept going with it. No plan. No hesitation. I thought about it. Actually thought about it. Then shook my head. No, I said. Not like this. Why not? I let out a small breath. Because I don't usually trust things that feel this easy. He slowed down slightly, turning his head toward me. And this feels easy? Yes, I said, without thinking. Then added, quieter. That's what's weird about it. He held my gaze for a second longer than usual. Yeah, he said softly. It is. We kept walking, but something had shifted again. Less playful now. More aware. After a moment, he said, Can I tell you something honest? I huffed lightly. You're really sticking with that theme, huh? Just answer the question. I nodded. Go ahead. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, he looked ahead, like it was easier to say it that way. I almost didn't text you, he admitted. That caught me off guard. Why? Because I thought maybe it was better if it just stayed what it was, he said. A good conversation. A one-time thing. And now, he glanced at me. Now I'm glad I didn't. Something in my chest tightened again. You don't seem like someone who does things halfway, I said. I don't, he replied. Yeah, I said quietly. I'm starting to notice that. We reached another intersection, stopping at the red light. Cars passed in front of us, headlights flashing briefly across his face. You know what I was thinking, he said. That you asked too many questions? He smiled. Besides that. What? He shifted slightly, turning more toward me. If I hadn't sat next to you today, he said, we would have just kept being strangers. Yeah. Same bus. Same time. Probably sitting a few seats apart. Yeah, I repeated. And we would have never known. I nodded slowly. That's how it works most of the time, I said. Yeah, he agreed. But not today. The light turned green. Neither of us moved immediately. Not today, I echoed. We crossed the street together, but the air felt heavier now, not in a bad way. Just more real. After a few steps, he said, quieter than before. I don't want this to disappear tomorrow. I looked at him. And this time, there was no joking in his expression. No lightness. Just honesty. It won't, I said. He held my gaze for a second. Good, he replied. And for the first time since this started, it didn't feel like something temporary anymore. It felt like the beginning of something that was going to stay. We didn't stop walking. At some point, I realized we'd been moving without direction for almost an hour, maybe more. Streets blurred into each other, conversations drifting between light and heavy without either of us trying to control it. It felt suspended, like time had loosened its grip a little. "You're quiet," Joseph said after a while. I glanced at him, just thinking. About. I hesitated, then decided not to filter it. "This," I said. "Us. Today." He nodded slightly. "Yeah. It doesn't feel like something that just happened randomly," I added. "It didn't," he replied. I looked at him. "You're very sure about that?" "I am." There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. That steadiness did something to me. We slowed down near another quieter street, this one almost empty. The noise of the city faded behind us, replaced by that soft, distant hum that makes everything feel more private than it actually is. "I think I know what this is," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Already?" He smiled faintly. "Not exactly what it is. Just what it isn't." "Okay," I said. "What isn't it?" He stopped walking. So I did too. "It's not nothing," he said. "Simple." But it landed hard. "No," I admitted. "It's not." We stood there, facing each other now, the space between us smaller than it had been before. "I've had random conversations before," he continued. "Good ones. Interesting ones. But they end. You go back to your life, and the person just becomes a moment." I nodded slowly. "Yeah. This doesn't feel like that," he said. "No." I repeated, quieter now. There was a pause. Not empty. Just charged. "Tell me if I'm wrong," he added. "You're not," I said immediately. And that was the truth. I didn't want this to be a moment. I didn't want to walk away from this and just remember it as something that almost mattered. "I keep thinking about tomorrow," I admitted. He tilted his head slightly. "What about it? Like, what happens when this isn't new anymore?" I said. "When it turns into something real." His expression shifted, not uncertain, not overwhelmed, just focused. "Then it becomes something real," he said. "That's it. What else would it be?" I let out a small breath. "You make it sound very simple." "I think it is simple," he replied. "People just complicate it." I studied him for a second. "You don't seem like someone who's afraid of things changing," I said. He shrugged slightly. "I'm afraid of missing something more." That hit deeper than I expected. We started walking again, slower now, more aware of each step. "Can I ask you something different?" I said. He glanced at me. "Go for it. What are you actually thinking right now?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "I'm thinking that if I don't see you again after today," he said, "that would feel wrong." My chest tightened. "Yeah," I said softly. "It would. And I don't like things that feel wrong when they don't have to be," he added. I nodded. "Same." We walked in silence for a bit after that. But it wasn't the kind of silence that creates distance. It was the kind that builds something. After a few minutes, I noticed we had slowed down almost completely. Like neither of us was in a rush to get anywhere anymore. "Richard," he said. The way he said my name. It was different. More grounded. "Yeah," I replied. He stopped again. So I did too. "I'm not good at pretending something doesn't matter when it does," he said. I held his gaze. "I can tell," I said quietly. "So I'm just going to say it," he continued. "I want to see you again. Not randomly. Not by accident. On purpose." There it was. Clear. No room to misunderstand. And the strange thing was, I didn't need time to think about it. "I want that too," I said. No hesitation. His shoulders relaxed slightly, like that answer mattered more than he let on. "Good," he said. A small silence followed. Then I added, "But I don't want this to lose what it feels like right now." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Today feels different," I said. "I don't want it to turn into something predictable too fast." He considered that, then nodded. "Okay," he said. "Then we don't force it." "That's it. That's it." I smiled a little. "You really keep things simple." I try to. We stood there for another moment, neither of us moving. And then, without overthinking it, I stepped a little closer. Not dramatically, just enough to close that last bit of distance. He didn't move away, didn't hesitate. We just stood there, closer than before, the air between us shifting again, quieter, heavier, real. And then, "We should probably stop before we stay out here all night," I said, half smiling. He let out a soft breath. "Yeah, probably." Neither of us moved right away. Of course. Then finally, he stepped back slightly. Tomorrow, he asked. I nodded. Tomorrow. Same bus, he added. I smiled. Same seat. He smiled back. And for the first time since this all started, it didn't feel uncertain anymore. It felt like something we were both choosing. And that made it real in a way I wasn't ready for, but didn't want to avoid either. The next day felt different before it even started. I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because my mind was already there. On the bus. That seat. That exact moment where something had shifted from accidental to intentional. It was strange. Nothing in my life had technically changed. Same apartment. Same routine. Same job waiting for me. But everything felt different. Like I was stepping into a version of the day that mattered more. I got ready slower than usual, catching myself thinking about things I normally wouldn't. What I'd say. Whether it would feel the same. Whether yesterday had been something temporary or something real. By the time I left, my heart was already beating faster than it should have been. And when I reached the bus stop, he was already there. Again, leaning in almost the exact same spot as the night before, like this had already become our place without us even saying it. He looked up as I approached and smiled. Same time, he said. Same place, I replied. For a second, we just stood there. No rush. No awkwardness. Just recognition. Feels different today, he added. I nodded. Yeah, it does. Better or worse? He asked. Better, I said, without hesitation. That seemed to settle something in him. Good, he replied. The bus pulled up a moment later, doors opening with that same familiar sound, but it didn't feel routine anymore. We got on together, and without even thinking about it, we went straight to the same seats, side by side, like it had already been decided. This is kind of surreal, I said quietly as the bus started moving. A little, he agreed, but in a good way. Yeah. There was a brief silence, but it wasn't like yesterday's beginning. There was no distance to close anymore. So, he said, turning slightly toward me, do we act like this is normal now? I smirked. Is it? He considered that. No. Then no, I said. He laughed softly. Good, he said. I didn't want it to feel normal. I glanced at him. What do you want it to feel like? He didn't answer immediately. Then, like something we don't ignore, he said. That stayed with me. We rode in that quiet for a bit, watching the city pass by again, but now, everything looked slightly different. Or maybe I did. Can I tell you something? I said. He nodded. Always. I was thinking about yesterday, I admitted. About how easily I said yes to everything. And that surprised you? Yeah, I said. I don't usually do that. He studied me for a second. Maybe you just don't usually have a reason to, he said. That made me pause. Maybe, I repeated. The bus slowed at the next stop, a few people getting on, others getting off. The usual movement. The usual noise. But we stayed in our own space. Do you regret it? He asked. I looked at him. Not even a little, I said. And that was the truth. His expression softened slightly, not relief exactly, but something close. Good, he said quietly. Another pause. Then, I thought about you a lot last night. It was so direct that it almost caught me off guard again. I figured, I said lightly. Don't do that, he replied. Do what? Deflect. I blinked, then let out a small breath. Okay, I said. I thought about you too. There it was. No joking this time. Just honest. He nodded slightly, like that mattered. Yeah, he said. I guessed. We both smiled a little after that. Not because it was funny, because it was real. The bus moved forward again, the rhythm of it almost grounding everything that was happening between us. After a minute, he said, quieter now. I don't want this to fade into something casual. I leaned back slightly, looking at him. It won't, I said. How do you know? He asked. I thought about it for a second, then answered honestly. Because I don't want it to. That was enough. For both of us. We didn't need to over-explain it. Didn't need to define it yet. We just stayed there. Together. Same bus. Same seats. But not the same people as yesterday. Because now, we knew. And that changed everything. After that morning, things didn't slow down. But they didn't rush either. That was the strange part. Joseph didn't suddenly become this overwhelming presence in my life. And I didn't lose myself in whatever this was. Instead, it grew in a way I hadn't experienced before, steady, intentional, and real. We kept taking the same bus. At first, it was almost funny. We'd pretend it was still a coincidence. Didn't expect to see you here again, he'd say, sitting down next to me. Yeah, crazy how that keeps happening, I'd reply. But after a few days, We stopped pretending. It just became ours. Our time. Our space before the rest of the world kicked in. And then, naturally, it extended beyond that. We started meeting after work. Not every day, not in a way that felt forced. Just when it made sense. When we wanted to. And we always did. One evening, about 2 weeks after that first conversation, we ended up back at that same quiet street. The one where everything had first shifted. It wasn't planned. We just walked, and somehow ended up there again. That's kind of poetic, I said, looking around. Joseph glanced at me. You don't seem like someone who likes poetic things. I don't, I said. But this feels like one. He smiled slightly. Yeah, he agreed. It does. We stopped near the same spot as before, leaning against the wall like it had become familiar. And for a moment, neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. Can I ask you something? He said after a while. I huffed softly. You never stop, do you? No. I shook my head. Go ahead. He looked at me, steady, calm, but there was something more underneath it this time. Are you in this? He asked. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? I mean, this isn't just something that feels good right now, he said. Right. There it was. The question that had been building quietly this whole time. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to say it right. I've been in it since the bus, I said finally. His expression shifted slightly, something soft, something real. Yeah, he said quietly. Me too. We stood there, closer now, the space between us almost gone. I don't want this to turn into something we look back on and say that was nice, I added. It won't, he said. You don't know that. I do, he replied. I held his gaze. How? I asked. He took a small breath. Because I'm not going to let it, he said. And I don't think you will either. That was it. Not a big speech. Not anything dramatic. Just truth. And for some reason, that meant more than anything else he could have said. Yeah, I said. You're right. A small silence followed. Then he stepped closer. This time, there was no hesitation from either of us. No overthinking. No questioning. Just a quiet understanding of what this had become. I'm really glad I sat next to you, he said. I smiled slightly. Me too, I replied. And then, we kissed. Simple. No rush. No noise around it. Just a moment that felt like it had been building since that first question on the bus. When we pulled back, nothing felt awkward. Nothing felt uncertain. If anything, it felt clearer. Okay, I said softly, letting out a breath. Yeah, this is real. He smiled. Yeah, he said. It is. Months later, I still take that same bus. Same route. Same time. But nothing about it feels routine anymore. Because now, I don't sit there alone, pretending not to notice the world around me. Now, Joseph sits next to me like he always did. Like he always will. And sometimes, I catch myself thinking about how easily it could have never happened. If he had chosen a different seat. If I had kept my headphones in. If one small moment had gone a different way. But it didn't. And somehow, one simple conversation turned into everything.